Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close Up, there's less than 4 months until the Iowa caucuses. In a one-on-one interview, we asked presidential candidate Ron DeSantis how he can catch frontrunner Donald Trump with time ticking. And the former president returns to Iowa while under fire for comments on abortion. What he said about Florida's new abortion law that drew rebuke from Iowa's governor. And he's Des Moines' longest-serving mayor, why Frank County says he won't run again this November.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and thanks for joining us for Close Up. I'm KCCI Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Well, we are less than 4 months away from the Iowa caucuses. And now we know both Iowa Republicans and Democrats plan to hold in-person caucuses on January 15th. According to a Fox Business poll released last week, Donald Trump continues to hold a commanding lead among the field of Republicans here in Iowa. As you can see there, 3-1 over his closest competitor, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. In an exclusive one-on-one interview, I sat down with DeSantis here in studio to talk about his aggressive campaign strategy here in Iowa. We talk about why it's not making a notable difference in the polls so far and whether he can turn that around. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's good to be back.
Well, you are spending a lot of time campaigning all across the state. What surprised you the most so far about Iowa?
Well, I think it's just people are very interested in what's going on. They take this process very seriously, and they know that our country's going in the wrong direction. We need to fix it, but that this nomination fight is really an important part of that. And so I think they're doing a lot of due diligence, kicking the tires and making sure that they make a good choice. So I've been really impressed by how they've approached it.
Are you all in on Iowa?
Yeah, well, we're all in on everything. I mean, we're in it for the long haul. We're focusing, of course, on all the early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, but particularly the first two, because the way the calendar works this year, you have Iowa, next week you have New Hampshire, then it's like South Carolina like a month later, which is a little different. It usually happens a lot quicker. So my sense is that Iowa and New Hampshire are really going to color South Carolina and beyond in terms of what happens here. And I think the good thing about a place like Iowa is if you're somebody like me that's willing to work hard, willing to show up and earn people's vote, they do appreciate that. I mean, I learned that in Florida. I mean, you know, we obviously have some major cities and stuff, but we've got 67 counties. We've got a lot of rural counties. And as governor, I went to places no governor had ever showed up before. And people really appreciate when you come into their communities. I see the same appreciation here in Iowa. They want to shake your hand, they want to ask you questions, and if you're willing to do that and earn their vote, then you have a much better chance of ultimately receiving their vote.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about that approach. You've taken a very grassroots approach to campaigning in Iowa, and you have held far more campaign events. You have campaigned in far more counties than former President Donald Trump has, yet he's far ahead of you in the polls. Why is that?
Well, I don't know that he's really that ahead in Iowa. I mean, I think he may be ahead, but I think it's fluid. If you really press people, the majority of people here still haven't made a 100% decision. And we have actually gotten more commit to caucus than anybody. I think we're up to 12, 13, 14,000, something like that. Put that in perspective. That's more than most of the Republicans got on caucus night in 2016. And so that's here in September where we still have the heart of the campaign to go. So I think even people in Iowa who know the process say, you know, what we're doing is really been unprecedented in terms of our emphasis on creating that grassroots network that carries you to victory once that comes to happen. And I think the former president, you know, he believes he's entitled to be nominated. He's not doing the work it takes to really earn people's votes. And I just view it differently. I mean, I don't think we're entitled to anything. I think you got to show up. I think you got to answer the questions. I think you got to talk about the vision for the future of this country. And that's what we're doing. And so where we're at right now, we're way ahead of where other previous Iowa caucus winners have been at this point in the process, if you look back historically. And I think we're built for the long haul to do very well.
Going into that, I mean, you're spending a ton of time here. I mean, multiple stops in one day and shaking hands and spending all day long with Iowans. And you have, right, more than 12,000, maybe up to 13 or 14,000 now. But the former president has more than 27,000. I mean, there's 4 months left to go.
He has 27,000 what?
commitments
Well,
to
we'll
caucus.
See, we'll see. He doesn't have an organization to do that. I'm sure he's got a lot of good people.
Right. So
But
that contrast in your organization here in Iowa is different between you and him. You know, why is it worth it to you? Why do you think that it's going to tip the scales when it doesn't seem to have tipped the scales at this point?
Well, look, we're still how many months away? People haven't even made final decisions yet. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to think that somehow you sew it up 4 or 5 months ahead of the Iowa caucuses. He comes into this with unrivaled name identification. People know him. You know, I'm a new kid on the block. I mean, I think people appreciate what we've done in Florida, but they don't know that much about it, and so we are able to inform that. And you know, I'm the only one running who everything I've promised I would do, I have accomplished. There's not one thing I said I would do as a candidate that I haven't actually done in office, and I've actually delivered more than what I promised to do. I think a lot of people are sick of the rhetoric and the sloganeering. We've had a lot of bold promises and lofty promises in the past, and then those haven't been fulfilled, and a lot of people that run for office overpromise and underdeliver. We deliver, so they can trust me as president to be able to get the job done going forward.
One thing you have spoken about on the campaign trail is Hunter Biden, and we saw Hunter Biden has now been indicted on federal gun charges. For you, does that change your viewpoint on whether America has a two-tiered justice system?
No, because the key thing with Hunter Biden is the corruption and the money and how many millions and millions of dollars he was raking in, and the DOJ and FBI have shown no interest in pursuing that, and that has had huge, I think, ramifications for our country. Obviously, Joe Biden's role in that, I think, is really significant when you're talking about kicking up 10% to the big guy. So those are really the heart of it, and I think some of these other ones, and we'll see how these cases ultimately get disposed of. They may not get disposed of with significant penalties, so there's a lot that remains to be seen, but they have not been willing to go after, I think, the heart of the corruption that I think has alarmed so many Americans.
Another thing that we've seen lately is massive labor strikes. We're seeing a UAW strike. We've seen strikes in Hollywood. If you were president, how would you work to support the American workforce, labor in America, without hurting the American economy?
Well, first of all, I think with respect to the auto industry and the auto workers, one of the things that's a big threat to that is Biden's push to impose electric vehicle mandates. The reality is that's not where the market is. Most Americans do not want electric vehicles. They want vehicles that use liquid fuels. That's obviously very important for places like Iowa as well. So we're going to make sure that we're going to save the American automobile. We want to preserve the ability of automakers to actually produce the type of vehicles that people want to buy. I mean, for example, you know, I used to have a Ford pickup truck. People who drive those, the F-150s, they don't want it to be electric. They want to have a gas-powered pickup truck. And so allow people to make those decisions. That will mean more auto worker jobs because the industry will do better, the companies will do better. So it's an example of government trying to force something on the private sector that's not going to be good for the companies, and it is going to end up with fewer jobs in the industry. So we will come and we will save the day on that.
Circling back to your campaign a little bit, you mentioned that you were impressed with how much Iowans know. They are certainly plugged into this race, and so they were watching closely that first Republican debate. You're likely to be on that debate stage for the second time in late September. Is there anything that you plan to do differently in that second debate? What can Iowans expect from you on that debate stage, especially if Donald Trump isn't there again?
Well, I think he should be there. I mean, I think he owes it to people to show up and to make the case. You know, we have a president now who's missing in action on the key issues. You owe it to people to defend your record and to talk about how you take the country forward. So I think he should be. I don't think he will. I think you're right, but I think that's a missed opportunity, and I don't think that's the way you go about doing this. Look, we were very pleased about the debate. Our metrics in Iowa were very positive, in particular for Iowans who watched it. Every debate's different. There's probably going to be some new subject matter, so we'll be ready to do that. We'll see how many people qualify. It's probably going to be a little bit smaller stage. Hopefully we'll have more time to be able to discuss issues, and so we'll be locked and loaded. We'll be ready to go.
One last question for you, because I know we're running short on time. We have 4 months left until the caucuses, January 15th. What is going to look different for you for the next 4 months while you buckle down here? What will be different about your campaign in Iowa?
Well, we're going to continue to build support. I mean, for example, we did an event this morning. The winner in 2016, I think, got 120 votes. We had probably that many people show up to our event and got about half of them to commit to caucus. And so you do that and you repeat that as you go throughout the state and continue delivering the message. And what I hear when we're able to do that, people say, yeah, you know what, you sold me today. I was going to go a different direction, but I'm with you. I appreciate it. It was great seeing you, kind of deal.
Still to come on Close Up, another candidate, Nikki Haley, surging in Iowa, the new poll numbers and her strategy to overtake Trump. And under fire, Donald Trump faces backlash over his comments on abortion. The criticism coming from Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds as Trump continues talking about the issue in Iowa. Welcome back to Close Up. A CNN poll last month showed in a head-to-head matchup in the 2024 presidential election, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley leads President Joe Biden by 6 percentage points. Haley had the best showing among all the Republican candidates that poll found. But to get to Biden, Haley first has to overcome Trump's lead to win the Republican nomination. And a new Fox Business poll, you can see it there, shows that while Haley's now third among likely Iowa caucus goers, she's still 35 points behind Donald Trump. I spoke with Haley about how she can maintain and build on that support and whether she can overtake Trump both nationally and in Iowa.
Well, this is your first trip to Iowa since the first Republican debate in Milwaukee. You gained a lot of attention for that debate performance, but it's been several weeks since that debate. Now that you're in Iowa, how do you turn that performance into more widespread support here in Iowa?
I think we're seeing it on the ground in the town halls. We had hundreds of people yesterday. We've got more today. People are coming out. They want to hear what we have to say. They know that we're tired of the spending by both Republicans and Democrats. We're tired of the debt. We're tired of the open borders. We're tired of the lack of transparency in the classroom. We're going to do something about it. I have spoken hard truths. I did that in the debate. I'm doing that in these town halls, and people want to caucus for us, and we appreciate that because at the end of the day, we have a country to save, and we're going to do whatever it takes to do that, and it all starts here in Iowa.
And there's only about 4 months until the Iowa caucuses. What does your campaign strategy look like specifically in Iowa? How are you going to set yourself apart from the other candidates? How are you going to get people to caucus for you here?
I think we're going to talk about the fact that I have executive experience, I have foreign policy experience, but I also have the solutions. We've laid out plans on border security. We've laid out plans on education. We've laid out plans on what we're going to do on the spending and the debt. And now we're going to be coming out with an economic policy next week. We are focused on giving taxpayers real solutions on how they're going to get a return on investment. Taxpayers are tired of working for government. Government needs to remember they work for the people, and we're going to start righting that ship. I did it in South Carolina, I did it at the UN, now we're going to do it for our country.
Will you campaign in all 99 of Iowa's counties?
We're going to go to as many places as we can. We've already done well over 45 events here. Get used to this face. You're not going to stop seeing me. So we're going to continue to go and touch as many hands, answer as many questions, and make sure we stay until the last person leaves at every one of these town halls, because it matters.
A recent CNN poll found that you were the best out of the whole Republican field when it comes to beating Biden in a general election. But in order to get there, you got to win the nomination for the Republican Party. How do you overcome Trump's lead nationally and here in Iowa?
I think you can see on the ground already, Iowans are looking at their options. We saw that in the massive viewership at the debate. We see that in our town halls. No one's talking about Trump. They're talking about what we're going to do for the country. And we're going to keep talking about that. Look, I think President Trump was the right president at the right time. But I don't think he's the right president at the right time now. We've got to go forward with real solutions, with a new generational leader that's going to start dealing with those tough issues that were taking place. And so this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. The momentum is there, we're going to keep building on it. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to see by the time January comes around, it's going to be a totally different situation.
You're heading into that second debate in a few weeks here. What can Iowans expect from you? What's your strategy for that debate?
I think they're going to expect honest talk. I think they're going to expect solutions, and I think that they're going to expect us to show what our vision is for the country, and I'm going to give them all of those things.
While you're here in Iowa, you are doing some events that focus on faith, and faith is such an important value for so many Iowans. Personally for you, what role does faith play in your life, and how would that impact you if you were president?
I mean, it starts from the morning, from the time I wake up in the morning to the second I say my prayers going to bed. It matters, and I think actually that's what's wrong with our country is we've lost that faith in God, faith in the American people, faith in our spirit, and we need to go back to that. You know, it was years ago, it was about faith, family, and country. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to the time where our parents raised us to be responsible individuals, where we went to school and learned how to be successful, and where we went to church and we found our faith and our conscience. We need to go back to that. We're going to keep talking about that because we have a country to save, and we can't do it without faith.
Still to come on Close Up, frontrunner under fire. Donald Trump's recent statements on abortion bans that sparked a rebuke from Governor Kim Reynolds. Donald Trump's comments on abortion last week have several conservatives speaking out. During an interview on Meet the Press last Sunday, Trump called Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' choice to sign a 6-week abortion ban a, quote, terrible thing and terrible mistake. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds signed a similar law back in July, though it is currently held up in court. Reynolds posted on social media that it's, quote, never a terrible thing to protect innocent life, and that she's proud to have signed the law. But the backlash did not stop Trump from talking about abortion and gaining endorsements from several pro-life Iowa lawmakers during a swing through eastern Iowa last week. Trump praised his role in appointing 3 conservative Supreme Court justices and also claimed responsibility for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But Trump also doubled down on his view that bad messaging on abortion could cost Republicans in the 2024 election, again blaming his party's 2022 midterm losses on abortion.
And last year, I was able to do something that nobody thought was possible. And you have to really think about this and study this, because it's very important. We ended Roe v. Wade. You just think about this. You just think about it. Because people have to get elected. We have to get elected. But I did something that for 52 years people talked. They spent vast amounts of money in fighting it, but they couldn't get the job done. 52 years they fought. And they fought hard. And they spent large, they'd have fundraisers every night. They couldn't get the job done. I got the job done. I got it done. And it's thanks to the 3 great Supreme Court justices and others on the court that I appointed. This issue has been returned to the states where all legal scholars on both sides felt it should be. A few points. Now the pro-life community has tremendous negotiating power. You had none when you had Roe v. Wade. Like Ronald Reagan before me, I believe in the 3 exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I believe in that. I think it's very important. Without the exceptions, it is very difficult to win elections. We would probably lose the majorities in 2024 without the exceptions, and perhaps the presidency itself. But you have to follow your heart regardless. You have to follow your heart. You can't do it for just the election, but you have to follow your heart. At the same time, we have to win elections. Otherwise, we'll be back where we were. In order to win in 2024, Republicans must learn how to properly talk about abortion.
Trump has not said whether he would support a federal abortion ban at 15 weeks. In last week's Meet the Press interview, he did say he would reach a deal on abortion restrictions that would please, quote, both sides, but he did not clarify the number of weeks he would push for or whether that action would come at a state or federal level. Still to come on Close Up, he's been Des Moines' longest-serving mayor. Why Frake County says his 2 decades of leadership are coming to an end. Welcome back to Close Up. Candidates in the November election had until last Thursday to file in Des Moines in order to make it on the ballot. Current Mayor Frank Cownie chose that day to announce he will not run again. Cownie was first elected to the job in 2003, making him the city's longest-serving mayor. KCCI's Todd Magel sat down with Cownie to talk about that decision.
I think that in talking to my family, it's time to look at what we're doing, and we do have some family business, and I need to kind of think what that next chapter of that looks like. I'm the fourth generation in our family business, and where do we go from here? And trying to juggle those two balls, I think, is unfair, not only to my family, but to the citizens moving forward, because I've pretty much really concentrated on this opportunity to work with our citizens here in Des Moines and really create a great city, and I'm proud of that. But it's time for the next chapter. Downtown used to be a huge retail area as well as a business area, and then somebody invented shopping centers, and so that changed, and a lot of those downtown retail went away, and so downtown sort of transformed slowly into a 8 to 5 business area, and then after that everybody went home and did their business someplace else. We, rather than make downtown Des Moines just a business center, we concentrated and thought about what is it that's missing here. Why is it that we only have a 8 to 5 downtown? We decided we needed people living down here, and we convinced a lot of the developers and worked with them to let's look at maybe conversion of some of these warehouses, some of these office buildings, the Des Moines building, the Fleming building. Those have become residences. I mean, I think at first they thought, oh, this is crazy, that's not going to work. But all of a sudden, people were excited about it. I mean, they were selling those things out faster than they could complete them. And so now we've got, some would say, 15, 17,000 people living between the Capitol and 18th Street and the river and 235 up there. That is a huge change.
And that leaves 5 people in the race to be the next Des Moines mayor: Connie Boesen, Benjamin Clark, Denver Foote, Josh Mandelbaum, and Christopher Von Ark. Again, that election is in November. Well, thanks for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.